The word for this video is fancy. As a noun, fancy means the imagination. As a noun, fancy means an image or representation of anything formed in the mind. As a noun, fancy means an opinion or notion formed without much reflection. As a noun, fancy means a whim. For example, I had a fancy to learn to play the flute. As a noun, fancy means love or amorous attachment. For example, he took a fancy to her. As a noun, fancy means the object of inclination or liking. As a noun, fancy means any sport or hobby pursued by a group. For example, trainspotting is the fancy of a special lot. As a noun, fancy means the enthusiasts of such a pursuit. For example, he fell out of favor with the boxing fancy after the incident. As a noun, fancy means a diamond with a distinctive color. As a noun, fancy means that which pleases or entertains the taste or caprice without much use or value. As a noun, fancy means a sort of love song or light impromptu ballad. As a noun, fancy means in the game of jacks, a style of play involving additional actions, contrasted with plainsies. As an adjective, fancy means decorative. For example, this is a fancy shawl. As an adjective, fancy means of a superior grade. For example, this box contains bottles of the fancy grade of jelly. As an adjective, fancy means executed with skill. For example, he initiated the game-winning play with a fancy, decked saucer pass to the winger. As an adjective, fancy means unnecessarily complicated. For example, I'm not keen on him and his fancy ideas. As an adjective, fancy means extravagant, above real value. As an adverb, fancy means in a fancy manner, fancily. As a verb, fancy means to appreciate without jealousy or greed. For example, I fancy your new car, but I like my old one just fine. As a verb, fancy means would like. For example, do you fancy going to town this weekend? As a verb, fancy means to be sexually attracted to. For example, I fancy that girl over there. As a verb, fancy means to imagine, suppose. For example, fancy meeting you here. As a verb, fancy means to form a conception of, to portray in the mind. As a verb, fancy means to have a fancy for, to like, to be pleased with, particularly on account of external appearance or manners. As a verb, fancy means to breed animals as a hobby. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe for more word videos.